afternoon. You will not hear from me for very much. Ginny is the woman of the hour, but I know most of you, but if you don't know me, I'm Lindsay Popperson. I'm the 29th senior minister of the Old North Church, and I'm delighted to have Ginny here helping us look back on these last 200 years in this building. This talk is being recorded, so if when you leave, you're like, oh my gosh, this is great, I need to go check what she said at minute 37, or I want to send this to someone else, you'll be able to find it on our website and on our YouTube channel. And we also have Judy Anderson, historian extraordinaire, did a talk about the buildings of the Old North Church over the year, and that is also available on the website. So Ginny has been hard at work over the last long while collecting stories and pictures, and I'm so excited to have you here doing this. So, Ginny von Rueden, everyone.
So, it's wonderful to see this crowd. I should say, wow. Major events, mysteries, and memorable people. 200 years of Old North history, 1825 to 2025. Thank you for coming to my presentation today, which highlights the history of our church over the last 200 years. I had wonderful resources for my research, including the Marblehead Museum and the books, The Spirit of 76 Lives Here, by Virginia Gamage and Priscilla Lord, The Women of Marblehead by Robert Booth, and Under the Golden Cod, written by members of Old North. Past ministers John Potter and Dennis Calhoun sent me a few photos, as did a couple other church members, and Lisa Nahadas graciously guided me through the files of the church archives. Stowe Walker gave me in-depth information about our buildings and maintenance, to which he has been dedicated for a long time. I am indebted to all the members, past and present, who nourished and enriched my life over the last 45 years. Preparing for my talk, I discovered stories of extraordinary individuals whose courage and generosity provided for our beloved church and inspired our continued prominence in the town of Marblehead. During hard times and controversies, they encouraged us to achieve great goals while pursuing our Christian mission in the community and beyond. This history starts with two important people, Reverend Samuel Dana and the Honorable William Reed. The first was the sixth minister of the church, serving 36 years, from 1801 to 37, having the third longest tenure. The second was the benefactor, who made possible the building of the stone church, which we celebrate this year. Both men had a huge impact on the congregation's future. This photo is the home of Samuel Dana, a federal-style house built in 1808 after he married Henrietta Bridge, and it's now part of the Harbor Light Inn. Located at 54 Washington Street, the house was a short walk to his work. And the new stone meeting house at 35 Washington Street, built in the colonial Georgian style, with a rough stone exterior that you can see. According to the authors of the book, The Golden Cod, the early 1800s was a most challenging period for New England churches. The Unitarian controversy, the abolitionist movement, the desire for an association of the churches, the need for home and foreign missions, and a program for the education of the youth were of paramount importance, and Dr. Dana met the challenge. He ensured that the first church would continue to follow the congregational faith of the Puritan forefathers, despite the growing influence of Unitarianism. He was the first moderator of the Essex South Association of Churches, and he supported the American Home Missionary Society when it was formed in 1826. His stellar achievement was founding the Sunday School in 1817, for which he was the first superintendent. A chapel was built on Pearl Street in 1818 to house the Sunday School, and was one of the reasons to move the church nearby to the present location. as well as the aged condition of the wooden church on Franklin Street. Dana's mission was to offer religious instruction for poor children and others who wanted to attend the classes. There were originally 14 men teaching boys and 19 ladies teaching girls the stories of the Bible and hymns. It was a time of prosperity in Marblehead and the church due to the lucrative fishing industry and the leadership of Reverend Dana, who brought about 500 new members to the congregation. He died in 1864 at the age of 86 and is buried in Green Street Cemetery. There's a plaque on this house on Pearl Street that says the Old North Chapel. When the chapel on Pearl Street became too small for the Sunday school and church gatherings, a new chapel and parish house was built in 1879 next to the stone meeting house. The Old North Sunday School, one of the first in the country, flourished over the centuries and brought many families to the church for its excellent programs. Here is the church and chapel in 1901 and the Sunday school in 1941. Here are Sunday school groups on the left in 1958 and on the right in 1960. We have the story of Joseph from 1964, and Children Greet a Goat for the Heifer Project in 1982. Third graders with their new Bibles in 2001. The Christmas pageant in 1992, and an annual favorite, This Little Light of Mine in 2007. The entire Sunday school was photoed here in front of the church when John Potter was minister in the 1990s. The Honorable William Reed, who was a wealthy merchant and U.S. congressman, left the second church when it became Unitarian and joined the first church, where he supported the Sunday school movement and was the major benefactor whose financial contribution led to the building of the new stone church. That had been a goal of Reverend Dana during his early years, with the difficulties of maintaining the old wooden church building. Because the Sunday school created new interest and increased membership, the goal became a reality with the gift of William Reed, who led the committee to build a new meeting house. The land was purchased on Washington Street, and the impressive stone building with its high-tiered tower was built in 1824. The interior was completed, and the dedication was on July 21st, 1825. The steeple has since been a major landmark in Marblehead. The original bell was made by Paul Revere, but replaced in 1886 with the one we have today. It was an exciting time in Marblehead because the Revolutionary War hero Marquis de Lafayette visited the town that summer on his farewell tour of the United States. The treasures of the church that came from the old meeting house to the new one included the silver communion service, Paul Revere's baptismal bowl, the box pew end, which you see behind me, Parson Barnard's Bible, and the gilded codfish weather vane, made about 1695 to 1700. On the front wall of the building, behind a stone marked 1824 in Roman letters, was installed a silver plate engraved with the names of the first ministers in a copper box with the engraving. This temple, for the worship of Jehovah, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, is the first church in Marblehead, constituted April 13th, 1684, was erected AD 1824. Samuel Dana, pastor, under the direction of William Reed, Calvin Briggs, and Dan Weed, agents of the society, principally by the munificence of individuals, and more than all others of Honorable William Reed. Laus Deo. The installation of the silver plate would lead to a future mystery. Reed also established a fund to offer emergency relief to people on the North Shore and set a precedent which continues to this day. Life in the early 19th century was difficult for most women of Marblehead, who endured a hard-scrapple way of life and suffered the losses of their husbands and sons at sea and in wartime. Girls were expected to marry young and raise large families. In 1816, the Marblehead Female Humane Society was formed by the wealthy women of the town to offer Christian charity to women and children who needed sustenance and support due to the economic depression in the town. The new association, including leading women from all the town's churches, and one of the founders and first directress was Mrs. Jane Fettyplace of the First Church, who was part of a wealthy and influential family. When Mrs. Fettyplace died in 1823, a new directress was appointed who was Hannah Reed, daughter of the town's most prominent shipping merchant, Robert Hooper, and wife of William Reed. When Mr. and Mrs. Reed moved to the First Church, they brought with them other notable families, like the Broughtons and the Hoopers. Hannah Reed exerted great influence in the church and the society, which she would lead for the next 32 years until her death. In his book on the women of Marblehead, Robert Booth wrote that although Hannah had a leading role in society, quote, it was the walks of piety and benevolence that her worth was seen and her power felt. The comfort of the poor, the relief of the wretched, the education of the ignorant, the spread of the gospel, the welfare of the church lay nearest her heart, unquote. The Marblehead Female Humane Society continues to this day, offering assistance and service to the people of Marblehead. Members of Old North have been actively involved in the organization, like Meredy Giles, who became the first outreach coordinator in 1987 to help people in their homes. The Society also funds other organizations, including some of those our own Outreach Ministry Board currently supports. Here is a painting of Hannah Reed. And the Gloucester Fishermen's Wives Memorial is a good depiction of the anxiety the women must have felt awaiting their husband's return while trying to support their families. A painting by J.O.J. Frost in the Marblehead Museum depicts the Great Gale of 1846, which left many widows and orphans. After 11 vessels and 65 men were lost. It was such a terrible disaster that the fishing industry never recovered, and townspeople turned to shoemaking full-time as their main industry. Late in his career, Reverend Dana helped to preserve the legacy of one of Marblehead's most famous and well-respected characters, Joseph Brown. We all know the story of Brown, who achieved freedom from slavery as a Revolutionary War soldier and bought a home and tavern on Gingerbread Hill. He and his wife Lucretia had a successful business in town that was very popular. In 1832, when Joseph was 83, he requested a pension from the U.S. War Department for his military service. The document is noteworthy because it was signed by Reverend Samuel Dana and also Nathan Bowen, a justice of the peace, who were both highly esteemed in the town. Bowen was a member of the First Church and succeeded Dana as superintendent of the Sunday school. Although Brown was not a parishioner of the First Church, the two men attested to his honesty and his war record, making it possible for him to get his pension, which was passed on to his wife to ensure the family's continued prosperity. Many other notable black soldiers were refused pensions and ended up destitute in the poorhouse. Joseph and Lucretia Brown were members of the Second Church, with other Revolutionary soldiers like General John Glover, who led the 1st Integrated Regiment in the Continental Army. This is Nathan Bowen's house near the old townhouse on the left, and Joseph Brown's tavern on Gingerbread Hill on the right. The years following the retirement of Reverend Dana in 1832 were very turbulent and violent, with the rise of abolitionism against slavery. Marblehead did not organize its own anti-slavery society, but residents did join those of other towns. With the town's history of prosperous merchants and even clergy owning enslaved workers, the town was very divided on the slavery issue, and many people were violently opposed to abolition. Did the First Church have members who were abolitionists? Few are recorded due to the risk to their lives and livelihood, because helping fugitives escape slavery was a punishable crime after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed in 1850. Among those we know was Dan Weed, who helped to lay the cornerstone of the stone meeting house. Thomas Wooldridge had a thriving shoe business, and they were both appointed to the Essex County Anti-Slavery Society. These men's families were all associated with the First Church. Our Stacy Street office building has an important history in the cause to promote free blacks, protect enslaved fugitives, and end the scourge of slavery. The Stacy Goodwin House, built in the 1690s, was the home of Samuel Goodwin and his family. He was a prominent merchant in the shoe industry in town, a man of strong principles, a founder of the Universalist Society, and a champion for the abolition of slavery. It is a mystery whether his home was part of the Underground Railroad, because it is not one of the 3 documented houses in Marblehead in the records. But Goodwin did often hold meetings in his home with abolitionists and traveling speakers, like the famed orator Frederick Douglass. This is Samuel Goodwin on the left, and the Stacy Goodwin House before its renovation. Douglass was the best known and most influential African American leader of the 1800s. Other speakers who came to the Goodwin House included Henry Box Brown, who escaped slavery traveling in a box, and Charles Lennox Remond of Salem, a founding member of the American Anti-Slavery Society. Samuel Goodwin's sister, Bessie Dodge, and her husband Simeon offered their home for the Underground Railroad at 236 Washington Street from 1840 to 60. They protected hundreds of enslaved fugitives. Goodwin helped the fugitives to find other safe houses before escaping the area towards Canada. The church-owned building was used as a residence until 1978, when the offices were moved to that location to make room for Sunday school classes in the parish hall. In 1998, a church building campaign rebuilt the structure while retaining the original ceiling beams and corner posts. Before that, I remember going to the offices many times and loving the old stone ceilings and rabbit warren of small, cozy rooms in the original house. Next time you have reason to visit the church office, try to imagine the fiery meetings for the cause of abolition, in which voices of prominent black speakers resonated throughout the building. Here's Frederick Douglass, the most photographed man in America during his lifetime, Henry Box Brown, and Charles Lennox Remond. When Frederick Douglass died in 1895, he was memorialized in the Marblehead Messenger newspaper by an eyewitness named James John Howard Gregory. Known as James J.H., he wrote that Douglass was, quote, the most distinguished man that ever honored our old town hall, of magnificent presence, standing head and shoulders above all his fellows, unquote. Gregory was Marblehead's most beloved philanthropist, whose successful seed packet business earned him the title of Seed King, and for which he produced the first cherry tomato and other vegetables. Gregory was a member of the First Church, now called Old North, to distinguish from the South Church, built in 1859 after 40 members of the First Church left due to a controversy. He was a pillar of the church community and was known for his many charitable works. When Abbott Hall was built and dedicated in 1877, Gregory donated the clock and the great bell inscribed with the words, quote, I ring at 12 the joyful rest of noon, I ring at 9 to slumber sweet of night. I call to free men with my loudest tones, come all ye men and vote the noblest right, unquote. Planned to honor the country's centennial, it was truly a celebration to hear that bell ring just a few months after one of the worst disasters in Marblehead history, the Great Fire in 1877 that burned a good part of the central part of the town. The South, or Third Church, as it was also called, built by the train depot, burned in the fire, and many of its members returned to Old North. Several years later, Gregory was on the planning committee when the church had a celebration in 1884 for its 200th anniversary, organized as a congregational church independent from Salem. In the early 1900s, he sent 30,000 books to 130 schools for African American children in the South. And he left money to create the J.J.H. Gregory Fund to benefit the church, as William Reed did before him. He was quite a distinguished and honorable man himself. Here he is, and a photo of the church during the 200th anniversary of the congregation when it separated from Salem and organized as a separate church. During the early years of the New Stone Meeting House, a young woman was learning to master the science of navigation and would become one of the most famous women in the world. By the age of 16, Eleanor Prentice was the best navigator in town, practicing on her stepfather's ships after her own father had been lost at sea. She and Josiah Creasy grew up together in Marblehead, and in 1841, they were married at the First Church, where they were both members. That began a life of adventure that few women have ever known, as she accompanied her ship captain husband on many sea voyages. Josiah became known as the best skipper in the world. Naval architect Donald Mackay designed the finest clipper ship ever made and named it the Flying Cloud, built to race the fastest time from New York to the gold fields of California, a 15,000-mile voyage. When her husband was named skipper of the Flying Cloud, Eleanor refused to stay home like other seamen's wives and decided to accompany him on the hazardous journey as captain's mate and use her skills as his navigator. This is his birthplace on High Street. The rest is history, because the Flying Cloud won the race on August 31st, 1851, when they arrived in San Francisco Bay in 89 days, breaking the record of 120 days. Eleanor's scientific computations and her management of the crew were responsible for the victory and her immediate celebrity. Josiah later served in the Union Navy during the Civil War. Eleanor and her husband were childless, and she lived for another 30 years after Josiah's death, until she died in 1900 at the age of 86. She was one of the greatest navigators of all time, and they are both legends in our sailing community. The record of the Flying Cloud was not beaten until 1989. Here's a painting of the Flying Cloud, and the only image I could find of Eleanor is this coffee ad, which says, "Nor'easter, a coffee for navigating storms." Throughout the 20th century, Marblehead and the church congregation faced many difficulties, including wars, prosperity challenged by economic depression, political turmoil, just like the 19th century. In 1903, Reverend Nicholas Vanderpyle expressed a desire, quote, to make practical application of the Spirit of God to the needs, sufferings, and distressing problems of our human existence, unquote. This photo shows the first 5 ministers of the 20th century, up until 1936, with Reverend Vanderpyle in the middle, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the organization of the church, which was in 1934. Many church groups were formed to provide fellowship and the opportunity to care for people in need and fundraise for worthy projects for the church and other charitable organizations. In 1868, the Ladies' Parish Society donated funds to help the church buy property on High Street and build the parsonage, which was in use until it was sold in 1981. The oldest fellowship group was the World Friendship Guild. Others over the years included the Barnard Club, the Social Circle, the Old North Couples Club, the Men's Club, the Wycon Club, SOS, Amity Circle, Companions of the Way, the Men's Breakfast and Hiking groups, bridge groups, and our weekly Scrabble group. Here on the left is the Social Circle making chowder in the 1950s, and a church dinner in 1960. Don't you just love photos when they catch you eating? Associate Minister Charlie Hood was a big promoter of fellowship activities in our church. So during his time, in 1979, the coffee hour following the service was born. Holiday fairs have always been popular events bringing many people together to benefit the church programs. The parish house, built in 1879 and rebuilt in 1951 to hold Sunday school classes and church events, was renovated again in 1998 to 99 and continues to house a wonderful variety of fairs, fundraising musical shows, and church suppers. After one of the entertaining cabaret shows produced over a 10-year period, a church member told me, "Church is fun." Here's the church and parish hall after 1950, a photo taken by the famed photographer Samuel Chamberlain. And Charlie Hood with women working for the fair. How many of you remember the old dividers in the parish hall that separated it into small spaces? Fair volunteers work on craft projects and bake goodies in the old parish hall and kitchen prior to the renovation in 1999. Here's Rand Niehoff's farewell picnic in 1991 and the members of the SOS Club in 2001. Here are fine, upstanding gentlemen in the first cabaret show in 2003 and the whole cast in 2011. There were 6 shows over a 10-year period. Our brilliant accompanist was Marianne Schultz, who also accompanied the children's choir for many years. Here's the men's pancake breakfast in 2007 and fair volunteers in 2016. And one of our very popular Mardi Gras dinners. People like to dress up in this church. Lay leaders have always been the backbone of the Old North congregation. Even though women sometimes outnumbered men 4-1, they weren't allowed positions of leadership until after women's suffrage in 1920. The photo shows deacons and deaconesses from the early 1950s who supervised spiritual programs and activities. But here are some fun facts. Until 1942, deacons usually held the position for life. An annual report in 1968-69 states, quote, "It is my thinking, just a thought, that a woman be named to the Board of Trustees. Women of the church contribute a great deal in all facets of church affairs," unquote. But it wasn't until 1974 that women were able to serve communion for the first time. Here are deacons and deaconesses in 1953. The first church came to be called Old North in 1859 after the schism that happened when members left to form the South Church. When that church burned in the Great Fire of 1877 and was not rebuilt, members were left without a church, so Old North welcomed them back, and many returned. As they did then in the mid-1950s, the church opened its doors to a religious group who didn't have a place to worship. Only this time, they weren't Christian. The town expanded greatly after World War II, with many new families, homes, and neighborhoods being built. A growing Jewish community needed its own temple. So from 1954 to 59, while the temple was being constructed, Old North extended an invitation for the Jewish congregation to hold Friday and high holiday services and a religious school in our parish hall. This began a wonderful relationship between Old North and Temple Emmanuel that still flourishes today. Here's a young Rabbi Shapiro with George Hooten and an older Shapiro with Randall Niehoff. The two communities began sharing a Thanksgiving Eve service in 1959 and inaugurated an annual pulpit exchange soon after. An official covenant was written and deep bonds of friendship were formed. I recall how much I enjoyed the sermons of Rabbi Bob Shapiro, who was then followed by Rabbi David Meyer. In the years since, the two religious communities have enjoyed trips together to Israel and worked to create a program called Welcome the Stranger to help refugees in our community. Here is David Meyer with John Potter, and later with Dennis Calhoun in Israel. The term guardian angel applies to a remarkable woman, Nettie Riley, whose name is synonymous with benevolent giving. Born in 1898 and raised in Beverly, she graduated from nursing school in Boston in 1916 and moved to Marblehead to work in the Burgess Airplane Factory, where she met her husband, William. They were married in 1937 and lived in their house at 24 Washington Street, which backs onto the Old North Church parking lot. Nettie gave a life of service to Old North and made an astounding gift for the church's benefit. She joined the Arrangers Garden Club in 1938 and developed a passion for flowers and gardens, studying 10 years to become a master gardener and winning many awards. She chaired the flower committee at Old North for many years, making beautiful flower arrangements for our sanctuary. Her own gardens became legendary, and she extended her work there to include the flower borders of the adjacent church parking lot. She was known as the trail boss because every morning she would unfasten the chain across the lot back entrance, admonish kids who wanted to play ball there, worked in the planting beds, and then closed the lot at night into her 80s. In 1983, when she was 88 years old, Nettie was awarded a citation from the Old Marblehead Improvement Association for her contributions to beautify the parking lot. When Nettie moved to a nursing home, she gifted her house to the church, and it was decided to use it for temporary emergency housing for a short term. Members of the church worked together to clean out and renovate the house, and it served its mission for a number of people in need. Eventually, the house was sold, and the proceeds of the sale were invested and became the Riley Fund. Our church uses this fund on a regular basis to meet personal requests of people going through difficult financial situations, to pay for housing and utility costs. Nettie lived to be 100 years old and continues to beautify the world through her generosity that keeps on growing and giving every day. And this is the back of her house on Washington Street, which is now painted yellow. Wayne Butler, another legendary church member, loved to talk to anyone and everyone about Marblehead history. He wrote a story about a mystery that was never solved: the theft of our invaluable historical silver collection in 1969. The collection includes 25 engraved pieces donated by church members in the 17th and 18th centuries and is known as one of the most unique in the country. As a church trustee at the time, Wayne recounted that the senior deacon called him to say he went to the church cellar to open the safe and retrieve the Paul Revere bowl for a baptism. What he found was shocking. Thieves broke into the building, pried open the safe door, removed all the silver, and got away, leaving their tools behind. The police and FBI investigated, but there were almost no clues. During that year, parishioners donated modern silver pieces, which we now use in our communion services. A year later, in 1970, Reverend George Hooten received phone calls asking for a ransom for the silver, and the church trustees approved a payment of $15,000 to have it returned. The caller was a, quote, friend of a friend wanting to help, and took smaller payments as individual pieces were returned in brown paper bags, and then was never seen again. One item was still missing when, after another year had passed, the church secretary opened a small box that came in the mail and found the missing cup. And some of that silver was displayed this morning during our historic church service. Here is the entire silver collection, heritage silver collection, and Wayne in colonial garb. From then on, the Sacramento silver has been kept in the vault at a local bank. It was thought the silver was probably too difficult for the thieves to sell, and they were never discovered. I remember the stress I felt as senior deacon when I would retrieve the Paul Revere bowl for a Sunday service and hide it under my bed until I could return it safely to the bank on Monday morning. Wayne Butler would sometimes come forward during a baptism to share the religious significance of the image on the silver bowl. It is a mother pelican piercing her breast to feed droplets of blood to her young. The church had to make a decision whether to keep the silver, donate it to a museum, or sell it and donate the proceeds to the poor. But many museums had more church silver than they could accept. Wayne writes that a vote was taken and a decision made that the heritage value of the silver was more than its charity value. Here are deacons setting up the heritage silver collection for communion. And the Paul Revere Bowl, donated in 1773 with the pelican engraving. The heritage silver collection is a direct link to our churches and our town's history. When Parson Barnard helped poor fishermen achieve prosperity in the maritime trade in the 18th century, they gifted the church with the silver in appreciation and to memorialize their loved ones. Wayne's love of history led him to work as the archivist for the Marblehead Historical Commission, and I would often see him sitting on a bench at Fort Sewell, telling stories about local history to people passing by. Here's Wayne working at a pancake breakfast and playing Santa for the Sunday school. The challenges of teenagers in the 1960s and 70s led Old North to make youth ministry a priority. In the fall of 1972, a student at Harvard Divinity School was named to be the church's first minister for youth and education. That person was Reverend Gene Arnold, better known today as the owner of the Arnold Gallery and Framery. I interviewed Gene for my research, and he was very enthusiastic about that time. He directed a new type of worship called New City to offer folk and rock music and multimedia after the regular worship on Sunday mornings. What do you think, Lindsay? Gene was a trailblazer because that had never been done before. In the Sunday school, he told the teachers to teach what was important to them, using their life examples, and not just teach from books. He held Sunday night meetings in the basement of 1 Pearl Street, owned by the church at the time, with the goal to create informal gatherings which recognized the youth as real people. He talked about important ideas which attracted Old North youth, like Betsy Halbert, who then brought friends from other churches. He created a darkroom for kids to do photography. With a dual degree in theology and theater, he was inspired to organize a theater group called the Golden Cod Players, which produced well-known plays like Inherit the Wind, about the Scopes trial. And they were held in the sanctuary with a stage that they built, casting people from local towns. He also directed the high school students in one-act plays they presented in the parish hall. Gene made the youth in town feel relevant to express themselves in a safe environment. Here he is as youth minister in the sanctuary. And the next photo, he's on the left in a meeting of the Marblehead Ministerial Association. Associate Minister Charlie Hood is second from the right. He faithfully served Old North for 20 years as associate minister and another 18 years as emeritus minister. Jane told me that recently a former member of the group stopped at the gallery to see him. That person now identifies as trans and told Gene how much he appreciated that Gene, quote, made us feel we could be who we are, unquote. After Gene and his wife Carol moved to the Midwest, then returned to Marblehead, he continued to serve the community in a religious capacity, occasionally preaching and conducting weddings, one of which I attended at Crocker Park. Here's a photo of the Golden Cod Players in the mid-70s, and Gene today in his gallery. My Christmas present in 1981 was this wonderful painting by Kimon Surmas, one of Gene's favorite artists featured in his shop. In this fanciful scene of Marblehead, Kimon portrayed Gene preaching at Old North. Next time you visit the Arnold Gallery, you can thank him for his important service. Over many years, our youth groups have been led by many dedicated and adventurous adults, like Heather and Rory Martin currently, to work in Habitat for Humanity projects in the South and Arizona, and service in a Native American reservation in South Dakota. They have also spent all-night vigils at St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York City, and engaged in other projects and programs in our community and elsewhere. On the left is a youth retreat in 1962, and on the right, a junior youth trip to New York City. Here is a photo of the group working for City Year in Boston and Habitat for Humanity in Arizona in the 1990s. I like to see one of my sons in that photo. Jean Arnold's legacy continues at Old North with 2 accomplishments of the last few years. We are now designated an open and affirming church and recently hired a youth pastor, Jess Easter, whose duties are shared by other churches in town for the North Shore Youth Ministry. We are fortunate that Jess continues our long tradition of engaging with our youth to guide them to be good stewards in the world around them. Here's a photo of Jess, and also a photo taken in New Hampshire last August during a youth group trip. A person whose contributions to the church made a major impact on who we are today was Linda Halbert. She was the most loving person I've ever known at Old North. She had a megawatt smile and a kind word for everyone. When my husband and I came to the church in 1980, I was impressed by the support being given to the Tran family from Vietnam, who were refugees from their war-torn country. It was Linda who spearheaded sponsorship of the family as they settled into a new life in Revere. Linda was the first woman deacon to serve communion in the early 1970s. When the Crombie Street Church in Salem began offering meals and housing to homeless people in the city, it was Linda who got our church involved and cooked Thanksgiving and Christmas turkey dinners there with her family. She started our Old North meal teams, and when I offered to join one, she said, "Okay, you can be captain." The Salem Mission Homeless Shelter was founded in 1980 and is known today as LifeBridge, with satellite locations around the North Shore. Thanks to Linda's inspiration and dedication, our Old North Meal program is ongoing at the Salem site with 8 teams that provide dinner every Tuesday night. She and her beloved husband, Kurt, who was of Jewish heritage, were part of every facet of our church life. She loved music and was a founding member of our bell choir. As one of her many acts of kindness, she regularly played the piano for senior residents at the John Bartram House in Swampscott. She was a founder and member of a weekly prayer group and prayer chain that met to share concerns for church members. Linda truly believed in angels and was the epitome of one herself. Here we show Linda and Kurt at their weekly job folding bulletins for the Sunday services. Now, worship services at Old North have a long-standing dedication to excellent music. In 1890, more money was spent on music than on fuel to heat the church. Here is a rather stern Old North quartet from the late 1800s. And the senior choir several decades later, probably in the 60s. Notice our ancient pew ends surrounding the organist. Here is the youth choir in 1967. And this was up front, here. The senior choir's robes have changed color over the years, and they used to march up and down both aisles. 2 remarkable women made huge contributions to our beloved music program at Old North. One of them was Marie Stultz, who served as children's choir director from 1973 to 86. She wrote 2 operettas for the children, and the youth choirs flourished under her direction. Her husband, Dick Stultz, was the church organist and directed the adult choir. By 1983, 95 members of the congregation were singing in the 3 choirs: Cecilia, Parish, and the adult choir. One of our greatest and most popular musical traditions almost never happened. During a big snowstorm on a December night in 1981, Marie initiated the Marblehead Walk concert series that launched what became known later as the Festival Chorus. It was a Messiah sing that drew a large audience, but due to the storm, the orchestra could not make the journey from Boston. Choir members like Chuck Angle braved the storm and drove into the city to rescue the musicians. Rick and I sang in the program and will never forget that night. Here we are singing in the concert with Marie conducting. And here's Marie conducting the children's choir in a later Christmas concert, and 3 handsome soloists. In 1989, Old North hired a new organist and adult choir director named Maria Van Kalken. She has served the church so long and so well that it's hard to believe there was a time when she wasn't with us. In fact, her tenure of almost 37 years has now surpassed that of Samuel Dana. Maria has enhanced the role of sacred music in our worship services. She gave piano lessons to many children of Old North, and I've told her that she did a better job raising my kids than I did. She grew the annual Christmas concert to become the famed festival chorus and later the Lenten concerts, which draw singers from the whole community. With up to 100 voices and a full orchestra, it has been a highlight of the Marblehead town calendar and widely recognized as the start of the Christmas season. The children's choirs and bell choir have enriched the programs and our Sunday worship services. Under her leadership, many outstanding musicians have been part of our worship services, and professional music groups have been invited to offer a variety of special concerts. Maria and the senior choir and soloists have brought joy and solace to members and people in the community experiencing life rites such as weddings and funerals. When Maria was given the title Minister of Music, it was in recognition not only for her exceptional accomplishments guiding the church's music program, but also for her compassionate care for the choir and the whole congregation. One thing we know for sure about the Old North congregation, we like to celebrate. In our almost 400 years as a church, there have been many opportunities to have celebrations for important anniversaries for Old North and the town of Marblehead. Some early photos in the archives show church members dressed as Puritans in 1934, reenacting a service at the site of the old Burial Hill Meeting House for the 250th. They even created a full-size mock-up of the first building. At a service in the church sanctuary the following day, the congregation sang Marblehead Forever, which was written by Marcia Selman, who was a Universalist minister and also a member of Old North. The 350th anniversary of the gathering of the church in 1985 was a major event with multiple activities planned by a large committee and presided over by Reverend Randall Niehoff. A time capsule to last 50 years or maybe 100 was organized by John Ferguson and ceremoniously inserted over the central door in the granite front wall of the building. A mystery occurred when a search was made for the silver plate originally placed in the same area in 1825, but it wasn't there and it was never found. An ecumenical cruise on the sailing ship Spirit of Massachusetts included people from other churches, and flowers were thrown to honor members lost at sea. Important celebrities like newly elected Senator John Kerry visited our sanctuary to honor our church's history. How thrilling when George Washington and General John Glover put in an appearance, looking suspiciously like Rand Niehoff and Ken Lawler. The book Under the Golden Cod, 1635 to 1985, was researched, written, and published by church members on the 350th Committee, one of whom, Bob Gottschall, still attends church regularly with his wife, Day, both longtime choir members. Town history has also been celebrated with this Old North float in the 1929 Marblehead Tercentenary Parade. Under the direction of Reverend John Potter in 1999, the church celebrated the 350th anniversary of the town of Marblehead. At the same time, major renovations were done to our church buildings after a successful capital campaign. Here are John and Marcia Potter and church members Jane Roundy, Bob Gottschall, and Ren Sui in a charming hat. Whole families joined in the festivities with children in costumes, as well as the adults. Our church building has endured many changes over the last 2 centuries, adapting to the needs of the congregation and the demands of maintaining the structure. One change was hard to accept and created controversy at the turn of the 21st century. It was about the pews. It may seem surprising now, but people were very upset when the decision was made to cut out some pews to accommodate members and visitors who needed accessibility for their wheelchairs. In particular, a faithful and beloved member named Lloyd Caswell. People were offended that damage would be done to our historic white sanctuary. I was a deacon at the time, and we did research so we could educate members about all the many changes that have occurred in our church interior. When the stone meeting house was first built, the inner sanctuary was filled with box pews, and there was no organ. Members paid for a pew and were charged more for the better seats. This practice lasted until 1943. This photo shows the box pews and painted wall decorations in both 1873 and 1884. In 1886, the old pulpit and box pews were removed and replaced with modern seats for the congregation and the choir. The Paul Revere bell was replaced, and the front of the church was rebuilt with granite blocks that you see today. The photo shows the sanctuary in the early 1900s. The hand-pumped organ was positioned at an angle facing the pews. And notice the painted decorations on the walls and the ceiling. A new organ was installed in 1927, which was larger and set flat against the wall. The former frescoes were painted over for a simpler presentation of the sanctuary walls. In 1925, the organ console was painted white. The podium in the photo is our original 200-year-old pulpit, which I'm using today and is now kept in the parish hall. Did you ever know that when you saw this? In 1971, the sanctuary was renovated, and the organ, pipes, and choir loft were moved to the balcony with the installation of a new Aeolian Skinner organ. In his role as superintendent of church properties, Wayne Butler supervised the improvements to create the simple, plain lines of the current sanctuary. The beautiful brass chandelier, silver, was installed at that time. Now, few people notice the cut pews and find it unremarkable that we took such action, and a courageous one as well. The church honored Lloyd, and he honored us by leaving a large legacy to benefit the youth of our church, of which he was very supportive. In the last quarter century, Old North faced new challenges while continuing to support our congregation and community dealing with wars, political strife, and an economic depression, as has always been the case. 4 major events confirmed our church's strength. One was an invitation. One was an affirmation. One was a crisis. And one has been a triumph. The invitation was extended by the Reverend Gideon Cabela, pastor of a Presbyterian church community in South Africa. When he came to preach at Old North, he challenged us to see for ourselves the lives they led and not judge them because they were suffering from AIDS and other afflictions. We met the challenge with our first church trip to the KwaZulu-Natal region in 2003, and since then, many members and their families have traveled 6 times to offer service, worship, and enjoy fellowship with the Pullela Church, spread out over 25 villages in a very rural and mountainous area. They have all commented that the experience was life-changing, especially for the children. Here are high schoolers sharing their life stories. And in the last trip in 2023, our young kids played soccer together. Leaders of the Pullela Church have visited Old North twice to preach and share how important the bonds are between us after 22 years in our ongoing Old North Palella partnership. Reverend Dana stressed the importance of establishing relationships with foreign missions, and Old North has sponsored that work and some missionary families over the years. In the tradition of the congregational churches, it is a vital part of who we are and our connection with the wider world. When Old North voted in 2008 to become an open and affirming church, we made an affirmation and commitment to welcome people of all walks of life, identities, and faiths as a priority for our future growth and mission. It is an important facet of our church profile that we stress providing a safe place for people to gather, experience life rights, strengthen their spiritual life, and make the church a living force for good in our local and wider community. Here is our church banner that sometimes hangs from the front wall. Here is the North Shore Youth Ministry at the recent Boston Pride Parade. The crisis we faced was the pandemic that COVID brought in 2020, which shattered our lives and shuttered our churches around the country, some never to be reopened. Our church leaders committed to finding creative ways to keep serving our congregation involving technology. Our ministers, Dennis Calhoun and Lindsay Popperson, conducted outdoor worship services in the parking lot with car radios. We had weekly coffee hours on Zoom, and our choir reinforced their commitment to our liturgical music by learning to sing with masks. Our tradition of outdoor services at the Lighthouse became crucial to keep our congregation physically together, even into the cold temps of November. Here is Rand Niehoff at an 8 o'clock a.m. service, and the most recent blessing of the animals last August. Our slow and steady recovery has rewarded us with a newly thriving congregation and the knowledge that we can get through any hardship together. Following the pandemic, a renewed spirit inspired the church to achieve two major goals. One was the highly successful capital campaign to renovate and restore our historic meeting house, garnering well over the amount requested in an incredibly short period of time. The second was creation of a green team to educate us on ways to safeguard our environment and acquire designation as a green certified church. Now that's what I call turning lemons into lemonade. The triumph we celebrate this fall is the 200th anniversary of our stone meeting house and reaching our financial goals to make much needed renovations and acquire new church staff. Last year, Reverend Lindsay Popperson was called to be our first woman senior minister in 389 years, after serving as associate minister for 5 years. With her leadership and fantastic sermons, people are coming back to Old North, and new members include both young families and older members as well. We were able to hire a new associate minister, Reverend Christine Rebar, who has brought new vitality to our children's and adult education programs. Old North Church has kept the faith with Reverend Samuel Dana and William Reed. We have diligently used our resources to maintain our beautiful and historic stone church. We have preserved the Sunday school and youth program despite major setbacks like dwindling numbers after COVID. We continue to provide assistance to our neighbors in need, both locally and internationally, and we have preserved and enhanced our congregational heritage while embracing changing times. Our outstanding women ministers and the ancient golden cod gracing our steeple inspire us to forge ahead to new and exciting times. Samuel and William would be so proud. Thank you. We know there's a wonderful reception being prepared downstairs by lovely volunteers. Some of you here have lived these experiences, so I wonder if anybody has any other memories to share or any questions to ask. Bob and Day? Lindsay said she could preach a 2-hour sermon. I could have given a 2-hour talk. There's so much more to tell. Yes. That's ivy. That's from the late 1800s. And this is a recent picture that I took from Jack Skronsky's yard. One thing that I loved when we did the renovation in 1999, the Link building was taken apart and rebuilt to house an elevator. And for a while, the church stood alone, so we could see all 4 sides of the stonework. And I loved it, to really see it how it originally looked when it was built. Yes? Do you remember? What did SOS stand for? Service something. Serve our souls. I don't know, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was just always known as the SOS Club. What? Save our souls? Okay. Laura's grandmother was in it. Yeah. Yeah. There was always a lovely group of the older ladies who sat in that part of the church when my kids were growing up. And I think they were younger than I am now, some of those. I'm one of those older people. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Betty?
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting how Wayne Butler got involved with the church. He, in his workshop over on Milford Street, and it burned.
Yes. You're right, yes. He had a boat building business, and the building burned down, and then he had all this free time. So he came over here and got involved in Old North. Yeah. Yeah. John, do you want to be a deacon for life? Yeah, when you were a deacon. Mm-hmm. Yes.
We were moved from Stacy Street
To
work in the Sunday school.
right.
And one day, the workmen were outside, and they were using the foulest language. So somebody called the construction company and said, "You must do that."
Well, if you want to know 100 details about the construction and the buildings and Stowe, he knows everything, because he has literally been in the bowels and up in the rafters chasing raccoons and doing what all to keep our buildings preserved. Yeah. I don't know that. Yeah. I'm surprised they let it get to that point. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yes, well, actually, Wren and Marilyn Freeman did a lot of the landscaping work that you see out front, and they had created this memorial garden. But then at the time of the building renovation, I told Marilyn that I would get more involved in it, and at the time, well, quite a ways after that, but at the time, Cara Twaddell and her family donated money to create this pond that was back there and put in the plantings. And I was on the building committee at the time, and we asked people to provide money for the benches, so they were provided in memory of loved ones and various other aspects. Well, over time, it fell apart. And I would be working back there, and I'd see people walking their dogs. To this day, when we go and clean it out, I often see balls and arrows and all kinds of things. I've seen people walking through there thinking it's a public park or thinking that there's a shortcut to get to Washington Street. So since then, I've had wonderful volunteers and keeping it going. But Ren has really spearheaded the renovation of the parking lot and keeps that going. So she's our latest Nettie Riley. Yeah. Anything else? Well, let's go down and have some refreshments. Thank you all for coming. Yeah.